Oh, are we starting? Sorry, just let me finish playing my level.
And cut!
It's lunch, people.
Pretty good punch there, rookie.
Oh, thanks.
You lucky we was just acting.
Oh, I don't know. I've got a pretty decent right hook. Oh, sorry.
Bit of advice, son. You're new here. Don't antagonize people.
Huh? Hey, noob.
Like I say.
I guess you think you're pretty hot stuff, eh? Land in the lead.
No.
Think you're a fighter, eh? Well, I challenge you to a mocap battle.
Wow. Do these things chafe or what? Just saying.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sitting through that. What you just saw was a cutscene sandwiched between two levels. I'm Mark Tannenbaum. I'm a technical product manager for virtual production here at Unity. Virtual production is the business of digital filmmaking. It's where games and film meet. Now, increasingly, there is a convergence between film and games. Real-time tools like Unity are being used to make movies, and more filmic language and filmic tools are working their way into games. And I want to talk to you about the tools we have available and how these techniques can help inform your games and help establish deeper emotional connections between your characters and your audience. So, what's really interesting about the language of film is that it's been developed over 100 years. Your audience already knows it intuitively because we've all seen so much film and television, and you can leverage these techniques to your advantage. So let me give you some examples. What I have here is a traveling shot. It looks handheld, and that gives a sense of a documentary feel. Now, it looks handheld because it is. I literally used something called the virtual camera that's available to you to do this handheld effect. I can also use very common techniques to establish connections like a close-up. A close-up just establishes an emotional connection between the character on screen and the person watching or playing your game. An over-the-shoulder shot establishes connections between two characters. We know that these two are in a conversation, and you can use reversals of over-the-shoulder shots to help create this connection. You can also create disconnection. This here is what you would call a dolly zoom. And a dolly zoom suggests a disconnection between a character and their expectations. You can see the world warping around them. Once you understand these rules, you can even violate them. What I'm doing here is called crossing the line. You typically think about a conversation between two characters. A camera usually stays on one side of that to keep the audience oriented. But here I'm deliberately breaking that rule because it helps establish another type of disconnection, suggesting that maybe the world isn't quite going the way the panda had expected. So I want you to understand this language and leverage these tools. Let's get into it. I'm going to talk to you about how we do this. So with that, let me get into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a number of tools. We're going to talk about Cinemachine and Timeline. We're going to talk about post-processing volumes, some new tools. One is called Sequences, which just makes the setting up of a movie much easier. Face capture, all of these facial animations, I literally did the acting for them. The virtual camera, which is how we get all this nice handheld footage that you see in the cinematic. And finally, we'll talk about the recorder for outputting your stuff. So it's a lot to cover in a short period of time, so let's get to it. Let's do a quick walkthrough of the project so you know what you're looking at. So I have a folder in which I keep pretty much all the stuff that I author. Everything else here is either downloaded content of some sort or is content created by the tools that I'm using. And we'll talk about a couple of those tools, particularly the sequences and takes folders are being generated from some of the tools that we are using to author. So you'll find that really interesting. Everything else, though, of mine just stays in this one spot. I call this project Real-Time Rascals Action Hero, and I call it that because I'm using Ben Radcliffe's Real-Time Rascals assets from the asset store. You can download them, but they're great. This is where my characters and my sets come from. I'm also using Mixamo animations. I'm not a very good animator, so I am using canned animations, which I blend together. But what is interesting here is the facial animations. You can't just go and get any old facial animations. We're creating that, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So hopefully that'll be interesting to you. Now, within each level, so what I've got is 2 levels and a cutscene sandwiched in between. So level 1, you have this scripted animation, but you'll note that the characters aren't where you saw them in the trailer, and that's because it's a game, it's dynamic. We don't know where those characters are going to be. But this is a trick you can do on the timeline. So I pick a track and I say apply scene offsets. By applying scene offsets, the character or object that's being animated will be offset relative to wherever the timeline found them. So if I've got a character's out of position, as it were, the animation will just play out appropriately, which is really useful. Because if you go now over to the cutscene, in the cutscene, I really do want them to be in exactly the right spot. I'm coordinating a lot of moving parts, so I want them to be in just the right spot. And for that, if I drill in here a little bit, you'll see that I am, instead of applying scene offsets, I'm applying transform offsets. So the characters will appear exactly where I want them. And that's super useful for what I'm trying to do. But so this plays out. This is exactly what you saw in the trailer. And I do a number of interesting effects, and I'll show you how, this interesting one here, I'll show you how I do that. And then at the very end, there's a whip pan, and the whip pan leads us to level 2, and the level 2 has an animation that goes in, and that's the mocap stage. So, you've seen this as well. So one thing that I want to just point out to you, you may be asking, how do I go from animation to animation? How do these all get tied together? And the answer is, they just play on awake. And I turn the game, I have everything under a game object, and those game objects get turned off and on. I use a little code, but it's pretty straightforward. So let's get into the tools. All right, so that's the basic structure. Let's go back to level 1 because I want to start showing you how I did some of the things I did here. So the very first thing I want to talk about is these timelines. Now, timelines are nothing new. You have certainly, if you've used Unity before, I'm sure you've come across a timeline. They're pretty common fare. But what I've done here is I'm also using something called sequences. Now, sequences you might not have heard of. It's a new tool. We released it last year. And its purpose is to be the top level timeline, the sort of timeline that a movie would play out on, the sort of thing you'd see in Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, that kind of thing. So I don't want to belabor what this is, but what it does is it's so helpful. It just solves things. Number one, I can navigate with it. I can go from timeline to timeline. But when I use the menu and create a master sequence, what ends up happening is I create all the game objects. And in the project, I create all of the assets. And everything just gets wired for me. So it's much faster than using a timeline on its own. Now, I want to focus, though, a little bit on the things that we're using within the scope, both of the game and the cinematic. And that brings me to Cinemachine. So Cinemachine is a programmatic camera system. It basically, I tell the camera what I want it to do, and it does it. I say, follow this or look at that, and it can do these things. So in my game, let me just hit play. And in my game, what I've done, this camera is looking at a group target, and I'll explain what that means. Over here, I've got a game object called group target, and as soon as this starts playing, I'll actually pause for just a moment. Here we go. Okay, and the group target is looking at our two characters. Now, it doesn't have to be two. It could be 1, it could be 10, it doesn't matter. But what I can do is I can say, I want these characters to always, the camera to always follow these two characters. So they'll always both be in shot. You see how even when they get apart from each other, the camera compensates. So this is really useful. You have a party of people, you want them to all be in shot. You can even do weights so that maybe you want one character to be more important than the others. There's a lot you can do here. Cinemachine has so many tools, but I wanted to just show you an example of how you can use this to your advantage. The other thing you might have noticed that Cinemachine is doing here is whenever a character jumps, watch this, boom, everything shakes. So how are we doing that? So what I have is on the two characters, I've created an impulse source. And what I do is I trigger this impulse source in code every time the character jump lands. So jump lands, trigger the impulse source. The camera has what's called an impulse listener, and that listener is receiving that signal. So we can have the camera react to these real world physical things to give a little weight, to give a little feeling and depth to what's going on. Now, note that it doesn't have to be a camera that receives this. You could actually attach a listener, say, to a bunch of objects and have them all shake or something like that. But cameras are just something where this sort of getting that feel that between what's happening in the scene and the camera is part of that cinematic language I was talking about, and that feeling that something is happening in the real world. So those are a couple of things I just wanted to draw your attention to. I also want to show you something. You may or may not have noticed this when we were going through the game, when we were going through the trailer at the beginning, how over here we're in black and white. Look at that, we're in color. Now this is part of leveraging cinematic language. I want the game to feel very film noir, 1940s cop show. It fits the music I had, and and the clothing they're wearing and all of that. But at the end, I want to signal, oh, something has changed. The world is not what we thought the world was. Oh, okay, we're on a film set, and we get a lighting change right there. But the idea is that something is different. So how did I do that? Well, that is being done with the post-processing stack. So the way we are set up is I've got this, on this game camera, I've got a volume. Now, volumes are useful for lots of things, but one of the things they're really good for is post-processing. And I've got what I call the old-style movie profile. And let's take a look. What have I done on that profile? I've got 3 different things it's doing, and it's taking over for whatever other effects might be going on in the game. So one of those is film grain. So I'm going to adjust the intensity a bit just so you can see this. I'll actually go over here so you can see a little bit of what I'm doing. But if I up that film grain intensity, you can kind of see it happening in the screen. I don't know how well you can see it on this, how well it's recording. Maybe if I do like large. I don't know how well that shows up, but it gives this, oh, of course, of course it's not showing up well. There, now you can see it because you have to, there you go. So now you can really see how much that's changing things, right? Big, heavy grain. I didn't want it nearly that effect to be nearly that thick. But what you can see here is I can play with that and just give it that sense, a bit of a film grain. I do a color adjustment so that I took the saturation out of this, so it's almost entirely black and white, and a little bit of vignetting, and the vignetting that just puts that color or black in the corners, so it feels like it's got that gated look old films sometimes have. So all of that gives you this particular emotional feeling. Over here, if we go to this camera, which is called Game Cam in Color, I just don't have that stack on, so everything changes. Now, let's go from here over to the cutscene, and we'll see that in this view, you can see in here, I've got what you'd think of as dust and scratches on my lens. And so the whole idea here is we've moved from the game, which was noirish, into something that's a little more documentary style. So handheld, things are in motion. We're now getting more of a dramatic feel. The edits are more intentional edits as opposed to, well, there were no edits in the original bit. But also part of that documentary style is a lens that isn't quite clean. So you see all this happening. And again, this is just a volume with a bloom effect. And that bloom effect, I'm not even doing bloom per se. What I'm doing is I'm adding lens stir, which is a thing you can do as part of that post-processing effect. So really interesting ways to just convey the language, convey a feeling and a change of what it is we feel. And again, like the camera motion is a big part of that, and we'll get to that towards the end of my talk. One more thing I want to show you before I move on from this section is I did say I was going to talk a little bit about what happens here. So let's look at this. This is what we call, sometimes it's called a push zoom, sometimes it's called a dolly zoom, the vertigo effect, because Alfred Hitchcock used this very famously. in the movie Vertigo. You see it, there's a scene in Jaws where we see Roy Scheider having this effect. The TV show Babylon 5 was a favorite of mine, used to love, do you do this effect? But the idea is that the world is kind of changing around a character, and you're getting a sense of the character's state of mind. So how do we do this? Well, this is great. Cinemachine makes this super easy. I have two virtual cameras. Let me bring up my scene view, which will help show this off. There we go. So there's one, and the other one is just back here. So 1 and 2. So they're changing position, and I tween them. And if I just change position, the camera would just pull back. But the other thing I do is check out the focal length over here. Focal length is 25 on the first one, but it's 57.4 on the second one. So the fact that I'm changing both at the same time gives you that crazy look. And this is what a real camera does. This is a technique that cinematographers have been using for a long time to express a particular type of emotion. Now, you may not want to get carried away with this, but it's good to know you can do it. All right, I've jumped over to another scene because I want to show you how the Face Capture app works and how I was able to capture the facial animations. So this scene just has a couple of the characters, just so you can see them. The astute among you might have noticed that I've got this connections window down here. This is actually part of the Live Capture package. So you need to install Live Capture from the package manager if you want to use this. So I'm going to click Start, and this is starting a server. And then on my iPad, you can see now where my mouth is moving. And as I move, and I'm going to enunciate a bit too much, the frog moves. And, you know, even with my glasses on, this works out okay. So I'll just do this, and you should be able to see, hopefully, over my shoulder, that it does what I want it to do. And it includes head movement, and the eyes blinking, and the mouth. I can even puff my cheeks. So, kid, I got some advice for you, right? So this is how this works. It's actually, in that respect, pretty simple. But let me show you what's important here for the purpose of creating a film. Now, one thing I've found, by the way, having something to hold the iPad is super helpful. So I'm now going to move my iPad into a clip that I have here. Makes my life easier. There we go. And record. And we'll get a little countdown. Well, kid, I think you made a mistake coming round here. Okay, so we've now recorded that data, and we even have an audio file on the iPad I can bring over to use for reference. And that data now lives here on the timeline. And I'm going to go to the recorder, which is currently live. I'm going to change that to playback. And go back to my timeline. And the animation is there. So I think it's fair to say that we haven't entirely cracked the UX on this. There are some serious optimizations to be done in terms of getting the data from the animation track, from this take recorder track, over to where you want the animation. That's part of why I'm showing it to you in a separate scene. But it works, and it's pretty cool. The fact that you can do facial animation, this is work that would take an animator an enormous amount of time and effort. And we can capture this with an actor. It's pretty cool. And I think that there's a lot here. There's a lot of future for it as well. I'm very excited for what we're doing here. Let me just quickly show you, though, what you get here. So we've got this shot. The shot is expressed in a takes folder, and now all of my takes for the various characters, various things I've done, are all stored in this takes folder. It's the same underlying system for this and the next tool I'm going to show you, which is the virtual camera. So let's go over to that. All right, so I'm back in the main scene, and you've seen this before, but I want to show you how I can use the virtual camera app to get these really nice handheld shots, and there's a lot of really interesting ways you can play with this device. So here's the app, and I'm going to make the camera live. So now you see when I move this camera around, I've got it right here, I move it around, you can see how it takes the shot. Now let's say my director has said he didn't really like what I did before, so that's fine. I'm going to get rid of this track that I had, and I'm going to create a new live capture take recorder track. And this is where my data is going to go. So I'm going to add a slate, which is like saying a new empty clip. And let's stretch this out to take up some space. I'm going to call it my shot. Oops. I'm going to call it my shot without all the other stuff. Not that it really matters, but. Okay. So, and I'm going to lock this in the take recorder, which just stops us from losing focus on it. And I'm going to hit the record button on the device, and there's a countdown you'll see on my game screen or on my camera screen. And now I can move this camera around and I can do all kinds of stuff. I'm not necessarily the world's greatest cameraman, but there you go. I've just captured that data. So now if we go back to the play mode and I hit play, you'll now see what I just recorded, my really, really lousy camera work. I think I did a little bit better with the stuff that you saw in the clip. I shot that many times to get that just right. But that's not bad, right? I mean, just the ability to do that, and immediately I've got this data here. Now, why do I also have a Cinemachine camera track here? Well, the Cinemachine camera track is tied to the take recorder data. And this is really useful. It means that if you look, let's turn this off and turn these ones back on, each one of these represents a different shot that I did, and I clipped them together, but a single Cinemachine track kind of guides them. And having them as Cinemachine means that I can blend them with procedural Cinemachine cameras. So you see over here, let's zoom in on this on the timeline so you can really see it. This is non-procedural. This is handheld camera work. But over on this side is a Cinemachine virtual camera, which could be procedural. This one is, and that allows me to get this cool whip pan. So I've worked the two together to create the ultimate effect that I wanted to achieve. Another really interesting thing you can do here is you can actually use a shot as the base of another shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set an iteration base, and I created this thing called my shot a moment ago. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to set that as my base, and then I'm going to turn off everything except focal length. Now, why did I do all that? I did that because what I want to do next is take this shot and I'm going to record over it. I'm not going to change anything about the position and rotation, but I am going to change the focal length. So watch what happens when I do this. So I can zoom in and then zoom back out again. And now if we play it back, you'll see I've got what I recorded. So I can literally do what in film is called pulling zoom, or you can pull focus as well, but it usually requires an extra person. So now what I'm doing is I'm essentially being my own zoom puller, my own focus puller. And that's nice because then it allows me to layer up shots. I can add how the camera aperture changes or how the zoom changes, or I can deal with my motion, my physical motion with one pass and then my rotation with another pass. So a number of really powerful tools here to make the camera more responsive to what you need it to do. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you for today is the recorder. Now, at some point, you probably are going to want to output your work, and maybe you want to ship your game with your cutscenes pre-recorded. That can be nice because you can actually get higher quality. There are some things that just don't work well in real time, and that doesn't matter so much when you record, but it might matter very much when you play back. The other main reason I think game people typically want to use the recorder is for making promotional material. You want to show your fans what you're up to. So I'm going to take what I just shot and I'm going to make it part of make it a video now. So I'm going to just move to this spot here. This is what I shot previously. And I'll slice this up. So now I've got what we shot, but just a little bit of it. I'm going to turn on the other take recorder track. So now you'll see they work seamlessly together, which is nice. Okay, and now I'm going to open up the recorder window, which if you've installed it, you do need to install it, but it's under General Recorder window, and let's park it here. And actually, why don't I just get rid of this so you can see this done from scratch. I'll add a movie recorder. And as you see, I've got a number of controls, various things to do, but it's not that complicated. The first thing is, where am I recording from? Well, I am recording from the game view. So whatever that's set to, that's the resolution I'm going to get. I am set right now to 1080p. You could set to something else, but you could also choose to pick a particular camera, record 360, render, there's various things you can do here that might come in handy depending on your use case. And then I'm just going to match the same output resolution. Actually, I'm going to make this 1080p because I want this to be 1080p. I think that's good quality for what we're after. You can do something called accumulation motion blur. This is definitely not something you'd want to be doing at runtime. It's very expensive, and even out of the recorder, it renders very slowly, but it does, under the right circumstances, give you a more cinematic look. So maybe if you are just trying to put everything down as video, this can come in handy. It's something worth looking into. Then you can pick which encoder you want to use, either the Unity Media encoder. I'm actually going to use our ProRes encoder. It's delivers very good quality, and the performance is actually quite good, so I like that. And then, you can set whatever you want to output to. So let's just say we're going to set this out, and I am going to start recording. Now, when I start recording, it will record whatever's in the game view. If I have a game running, it'll record the game. So when you saw my trailer at the beginning, what you were seeing was a little bit of gameplay. But for our purpose right now, I'm just going to record what is what's in the cutscene. So here we go. You see it going, and you can see the performance is all right. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'll let this run for about 15 seconds so you can see all of this being recorded out, including my new footage and the previously shot footage. So you can see that it's not perfect. The recorder adds a bit of overhead due to encoding and disk I/O, which makes your project run a bit slower during the recording. So that's pretty good. Now, I am going to click this little button here, which will open up a folder and has what we just shot.
You lucky we was just victim. Oh, I don't know. I've got a pretty decent right hook. Oh, sorry.
So there you go. We've just recorded. Now, the recorder has lots of capabilities. In addition to recording a movie, you can actually record animation data. You can record image sequences, AOV data, which is useful in the film business, particularly for doing separations, audio, FBX data, etc. There's lots of different things that are that you can output. And indeed, if you're technically minded, you can even write your own recorders. So there you go. That is a rundown of a whole bunch of tools that you might find useful for cinematic creation within the context of your games. I hope that was helpful. It gives you some idea of the many cinematic tools and capabilities that are available to you within Unity. I covered timeline and sequences, Cinemachine and the post-processing stack. We talked about the virtual face capture, the virtual camera, and recorder. So many tools that are available to you. And again, I want to emphasize, these are actually the exact same tools that professionals are now using in the film business. So it's no longer a question of, are you in the games business? Are you in the film business? it's all virtual production. All of this is a combination of using real world data and digital data, bringing it together to create entertainment and interesting content that is helpful for your business, to help you make better games or better films or whatever it is that you are that you are working on, whatever you are passionate about. At Unity, we believe the world is a better place with more creators in it. And I really think that the creation tools that we're bringing to you are just going to change the game, so to speak, with regard to so many different businesses beyond even film and television and games, to help people realize their vision. So thank you once again. I'm Mark Tannenbaum, the technical product manager for Unity, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it valuable. Take care.